On a Sunday night in Tempe, Arizona, a woman pushed a bicycle across 4 lanes. It was March 18, 2018, at 9:58 in the evening. The road was dry and the streetlights were on. The vehicle coming toward her was driving itself. It had been tracking something in her position for the last 4 seconds, and it was still deciding what that something was. This is the first known pedestrian death caused by a self-driving car, and the failure at the heart of it lasted exactly 1 second. The computer never once concluded she was a person. The brakes that would have stopped the car were already bolted into it. They had been switched off that evening by a rule written years earlier for a reason that made sense at the time. The case comes down to a single sentence in the federal report. The software did not include any consideration for a pedestrian crossing away from a crosswalk. She was doing something the system had no word for. Crossing a road where there is no crosswalk is one of the most ordinary things a person does. That test fleet had run the same loop about 50,000 times, and its drivers told investigators they met people doing it routinely. North Mill Avenue runs out of downtown Tempe past the university, 4 lanes wide with a long landscaped median down the middle of it. That median is about 71 feet across. Set into it, right beside where all of this happens, is an X-shaped path of red brick. It has the appearance of a pathway. That is the National Transportation Safety Board's own phrase for it, and it is a fair phrase because a brick path laid across a median looks like an invitation to walk there. 4 signs on that median told people not to. USE crosswalk, each one said, beside a symbol of a pedestrian with a line through it. The nearest legal crossing was hundreds of feet away, and the brick was right there, so people crossed on the brick. Uber's Advanced Technologies group ran a test route through here. A vehicle would drive the loop in autonomous mode with 1 employee in the driver's seat, watching the road and tagging anything unusual on a tablet. Those employees knew about this stretch. Their training had included a closed course with motorized dummies stepping out in front of them, precisely so they would expect people crossing where they shouldn't. The software they were monitoring had been built from a different set of expectations, and that difference is where this case turns. Night after night, the loop ran past that brick path. The software made the same set of decisions about what it was seeing, in the same order, and nobody had any reason to look at them. To drive, the system had to answer 2 questions about everything around it. What is that, and where is it going? It answered the first with a short list of labels: vehicle, bicycle, pedestrian, and a catch-all called other for things it could not place. The second question is the hard one. The system answered it from the object's own past. It took where the thing had been over the last few seconds and drew that line forward into where it was going. Engineers call that an object's tracking history. It is the whole basis of the prediction, and it is the reason a machine can tell a parked car from one that is pulling out. But the code had a rule that turned out to matter more than anything else on this road. If the system changed its mind about what an object was, it discarded that object's tracking history and started over. An object that has just been reclassified has no past. With no past, there is nothing to draw forward, so the system falls back on what a thing of that type is generally assumed to want. A vehicle in a travel lane is assumed to be going along the lane. Something labeled other is assumed to be sitting still. And a pedestrian away from a crosswalk was assumed to be nothing at all, because the design did not include that person. That last sentence is close to a direct quotation. The safety board wrote that the system design did not include consideration for jaywalking pedestrians, and it placed the finding in the section explaining why she was never identified. The radar picks her up 5.6 seconds before impact, at about 350 feet. It calls her a vehicle. 0.4 of a second later, the LiDAR disagrees and calls her other, which means the system treats her as stationary. Then it changes to vehicle. Then it alternates between vehicle and other, back and forth, for more than a second. Every one of those flips wipes her history. She is walking steadily across 4 lanes the entire time, at a constant speed in a straight line, and the machine keeps meeting her for the first time. At 2.6 seconds, it decides she is a bicycle, sitting still. At 1.5 seconds, it downgrades her to other, and notes she is now partly in its lane. The car is doing 43 miles an hour. It plans a path around her, to the right, the way you would edge around a traffic cone. That plan holds for 0.3 of a second. Then, 1.2 seconds before impact, she is labeled a bicycle again, fully in the lane, and the plan is no longer possible. The system now knows it needs to brake hard to avoid a collision, and it knows this with 1.1 seconds still to spare. It does not brake. For 1 full second, by design, it does nothing. The engineers called this action suppression. Whenever the software declared an emergency, it held the brakes for 1 second while it double-checked the hazard and looked for a way around, or while the human took over. They had a real reason for it. A developmental system that brakes hard every time it mistakes a shadow for a wall will throw its passengers around and get rear-ended. Uber's engineers wanted no part of that. So, the emergency stop was made to wait, and the human in the seat became the primary countermeasure. The company's answer to a sudden hazard was the person watching the road. The operator was not told. When suppression started, the system raised no alarm, no chime, and no light. The 1 second in which she was the entire safety system was a second she never knew was happening. She was looking down. Over that whole trip, she had spent about 1/3 of her time looking at the bottom of the center console. Her phone was sitting there, streaming a television show. 6 seconds before impact, she looked down again. She looked up 1 second before it, which is the same second the software spent deciding not to brake yet. The suppression ends 0.2 of a second before impact. There is no longer any stop worth making, so the car begins a gentle slowdown and sounds a chime. She grabs the wheel with 0.02 of a second left, and the car strikes her at 39 miles an hour. Her operator braked 0.7 of a second after the impact. Every part of the machine that might have stopped sooner was either confused or waiting. Elaine Herzberg, 49 years old, died of her injuries. She had been walking a bicycle across a road she had no legal right to be on. The test car did not arrive at Uber without brakes of its own. It was a Volvo XC90, and it came from the factory with automatic emergency braking that detects pedestrians and cyclists at speeds up to 43 miles an hour. Nothing was wrong with that system. It had been designed to switch off automatically the moment Uber software took control, so that two systems would never fight over the same car. Volvo later modeled the crash for investigators. It ran 20 versions of her walk, varying her speed and her angle across the road, and it asked one question of each: what would the factory system have done? The forward collision warning would have gone off 2.5 seconds before impact. The automatic brakes would have fired at 1.4 seconds, which is 0.2 of a second before the experimental system even declared an emergency. In 17 of the 20 runs, the car simply did not hit her. In the other 3, it hit her at under 10 miles an hour. The National Transportation Safety Board published its findings in November 2019, and its probable cause begins where the public conversation had already settled. The board determined that the probable cause was the failure of the vehicle operator to monitor the driving environment. She was visually distracted by her personal phone throughout the trip. Then the same paragraph keeps going. Contributing to the crash, the board wrote, were Uber ATG's inadequate safety risk assessment and its ineffective oversight of operators. It also named their failure to address automation complacency, all of it a consequence of an inadequate safety culture. The board also found that the company had cut its test vehicles from 2 operators to 1, 5 months before the crash. Uber could have reviewed how its operators behaved at any time, and rarely did. It listed 2 further contributing factors: that she crossed outside a crosswalk while impaired, which the toxicology showed, and that Arizona's oversight of automated vehicle testing was insufficient. Criminally, only 1 person was ever reached. Prosecutors found no basis for charging Uber. The operator, Rafaela Vasquez, pleaded guilty to endangerment in July 2023 and was sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation. The design had made her the primary countermeasure against any hazard the software would not brake for, and it never told her when that moment arrived. Uber stopped all public road testing the next morning, and the changes that followed read like a list of the report's own findings. Tracking history is now kept when an object's label changes, so a thing that has been walking for 4 seconds keeps its 4 seconds. Crossing the road mid-block became something the software is allowed to expect a pedestrian to do. The second operator came back, along with real monitoring of whether operators were watching the road. And action suppression was deleted. The company shortened the delay first, tested what happened, and then removed the process entirely. Uber reported what happened next, and this is the part of the record that deserves to be read slowly. With the delay gone, there was no increase in hard braking from falsely detected emergencies. That list of labels was written by people in an office before the car ever drove anywhere. Whatever is not on the list does not become an emergency. It becomes an object with no past and no purpose, and the machine drives on. The Safety Board asked the federal regulator for something modest after this: require companies testing these systems on public roads to file a safety assessment and actually read them. Both of those recommendations are still open today, and the board's own file marks the government's response as unacceptable. Filing remains voluntary. Meanwhile, driverless vehicles now carry roughly 500,000 paid passenger trips a week in American cities. Somewhere in every one of those cars is a list of the things a person might be doing, and none of us outside the company gets to read it. If you could put one line on that list, what would you write? The whole failure fits in the gap between two design goals. The engineers wanted a car that would not brake for ghosts, and they got one. That setting exists inside every alarm anyone has ever built. It is always chosen in advance by someone who does not yet know what the real emergency will look like. In a hospital in East Texas, that dial was set by a piece of software that had replaced a steel safety it thought it no longer needed. 6 people were given radiation doses 100 times too large, and the machine told the operator nothing was wrong. Consider liking and subscribing for more load-bearing history videos.